What happens when a billionaire mocks a black waitress in a language he thinks she can't understand? He laughs, his friends laugh, but then, in just seconds, the entire room falls silent. Why? Because this waitress wasn't just serving food, she was about to serve him the lesson of his life in flawless Arabic. Stay with me, because this story will leave you speechless. It was supposed to be just another busy evening at the elegant five-star restaurant in downtown Manhattan. The kind of place where the clinking of crystal glasses blended with soft jazz melodies and where the faint aroma of gourmet dishes floated through the air like perfume. The restaurant itself was a symbol of luxury, gold-trimmed menus, velvet chairs, and chandeliers that dripped with light, making everything sparkle with an otherworldly glow. It wasn't unusual for celebrities, CEOs, and billionaires to walk in casually, as if it were just another coffee shop. Except here, every movement was wrapped in elegance, and every detail screamed wealth. Guests wore designer suits and gowns, their conversations peppered with deals worth millions, and their laughter a reminder that this was a place only the richest could afford to treat as ordinary. Among the team of well-dressed waitstaff was Amina, a young black woman who carried herself with grace and quiet determination. She had worked there for 2 years, weaving through the crowd with perfect posture, balancing trays of crystal glasses as though she was born for it. But Amina wasn't just another waitress lost in the background of luxury. Behind her warm smile and professional demeanor was a young woman with dreams much bigger than the polished table she served. Every night, after long shifts, she returned to her small apartment, opened her books, and studied for the future she was building brick by brick. Graduate school was her goal, a step toward a career where her intellect and hard work could shine. The restaurant was never meant to be her final stop. It was simply a stepping stone, a place to earn the money she needed while sharpening her resilience. Yet there was something else about Amina that almost no one around her knew. She carried a hidden talent, one that had the power to shift the way people saw her. Amina was a polyglot, a lover of languages, and her fluency stretched far beyond English. She had taught herself Arabic, Spanish, French, and more, not just basic phrases, but with the mastery of someone who had lived and breathed them. It was her secret weapon, tucked away quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That evening, as the chandeliers sparkled above and the music played softly, one of the richest men in the world entered with his entourage. The room shifted the moment he walked in. He was a Middle Eastern billionaire, famous not just for his incredible wealth, but also for his air of untouchable arrogance. He carried himself like a king entering his palace, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his watch worth more than most people's homes. The staff whispered his name in awe, but those who knew his reputation understood what came next. He was a man who saw others as beneath him, a man who thrived on his own superiority. When Amina was assigned to serve his table, she straightened her shoulders, unaware that in the next hour, her world, and his, was about to change forever. As Amina approached the table with her notepad held carefully in her hand and her usual warm smile lighting up her face, the billionaire barely spared her a glance. To him, she was invisible, just another server blending into the background of chandeliers, fine wine, and whispered business deals. He leaned ever so slightly toward his business partners, lowering his voice into a language he assumed no one else in the restaurant would understand. The words rolled smoothly off his tongue in Arabic, but the dismissive tone, paired with the smirk curling at the corner of his lips, carried a weight sharper than any blade. At first, it sounded like harmless chatter. To the casual ear, it could have been nothing more than a comment about the menu or the wine list. But Amina's ear was finely tuned. She caught every syllable, every inflection, and what she heard made her pulse skip for just a moment. "She's just a poor servant," the billionaire muttered arrogantly in Arabic, his voice dripping with disdain. "People like her should be grateful just to stand near our table." The men sitting beside him chuckled, shaking their heads as though the insult were a clever joke. They lifted their glasses, clinking them lightly, while the billionaire leaned back in his chair, shoulders square, eyes glinting with superiority. To him, this was nothing out of the ordinary. Mockery was part of his language, Arrogance the crown he wore without shame. He was convinced his words were a private dagger, one that would never cut because no one around him could possibly understand them. But he was wrong. Amina froze for the briefest second, her heart tightening. She had heard every word, and though it stung, the wound quickly transformed into something else, strength. What the billionaire didn't know was that Amina was no ordinary waitress. Since her teenage years, she had been fascinated by languages. While others her age obsessed over music or fashion, she buried herself in books, teaching herself to communicate in tongues that connected her to cultures across the world. Arabic was not just a skill she had picked up casually, it was one of her strongest languages. She could read, write, and speak it with a level of fluency that even native speakers respected. She inhaled deeply, her professional smile never faltering, even though her mind was racing. The easy option would have been to ignore the insult, to swallow the sting, and continue with her duties. But Amina was not built for silence in the face of disrespect. She understood the power of timing, of words spoken at the right moment. So instead of letting anger flash across her face, she steadied herself. Calmness became her armor. She decided to wait, to let the billionaire bask in his illusion of superiority for just a little longer. What he didn't know was that the very language he used to mock her would soon become the tool she used to put him in his place. When she returned with the drinks, balancing the tray with the kind of poise that only came from years of practice, the billionaire leaned back in his chair with a smug grin plastered across his face. His eyes followed her every step, not with respect, but with that same air of superiority he carried like a second skin. As she set the glasses down carefully, his voice rose again, this time louder, more deliberate, as though he wanted his companions to hear and join in his mockery. "Look at her," he scoffed in Arabic, his words sharp and dripping with condescension. "She probably doesn't even understand the menu she's holding." His companions erupted in quiet laughter, the kind of stifled chuckles meant to flatter the man who signed their checks. They nodded along, enjoying the cruelty like it was part of the evening's entertainment. The billionaire leaned back, satisfied, his eyes darting toward Amina just long enough to make it clear. This insult was aimed directly at her. But this time, Amina didn't freeze. This time, she felt a steady strength rise within her chest, like a flame waiting to break free. She set the last glass down gently, the clink of crystal against the polished wood table echoing in the heavy silence that followed. Straightening her posture, she drew in a slow, steady breath, and then, locking her gaze firmly on the billionaire, she spoke. Her voice was calm, firm, and clear, yet it carried the weight of thunder. And she spoke in flawless, eloquent Arabic. "Sir," she began, each syllable slicing through the arrogance that hung in the air, "I understood every single word you said." The billionaire's smirk collapsed instantly, replaced by shock. His companions stopped mid-laugh, their eyes widening as though they had just seen something impossible. "And for your information," Amina continued, her tone unwavering, "I can speak Arabic, French, Spanish, and 3 other languages fluently. So before you mock someone, remember this: respect costs nothing. Arrogance, however, reveals far more about you than about the person you choose to insult." The silence that followed was deafening. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the entire restaurant had paused. The billionaire's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as he struggled to find a response. His companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to meet his eyes or hers. It was as if they had all witnessed something unthinkable. A waitress, the very person he had dismissed as beneath him, had stood tall and spoken to him not only in his own language, but with a mastery and confidence that dwarfed his wealth. In that frozen moment, even the faint jazz music playing through the speakers seemed louder, filling the space with a dramatic backdrop. Nearby guests glanced over curiously, sensing tension thick in the air. Amina didn't waver. She stood rooted in strength, her calm expression untouched by fear. And for the first time that evening, the billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the world, found himself utterly speechless. The billionaire, a man who had built his entire reputation on power, wealth, and control, suddenly looked small. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, someone had pierced through the shield of arrogance he wore like armor. His carefully curated image of dominance cracked in front of his own companions, and the silence that followed was louder than any applause. His face, once smug and untouchable, now carried a shade of embarrassment he couldn't hide. One of his companions leaned closer, unable to contain his astonishment, and whispered, "She speaks better Arabic than we do." The words hung in the air, a quiet dagger that only deepened the sting. Heads around the table nodded almost unconsciously, their earlier laughter replaced with wide-eyed respect for the woman standing before them. The billionaire shifted in his chair, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his glass. Instead of erupting in anger, as everyone expected, he cleared his throat awkwardly. The sound was faint, but in the silence of the moment, it felt almost thunderous. For the very first time that evening, he raised his eyes to Amina and truly looked at her, not as a servant, not as someone beneath him, but as a human being. His expression softened, the sharpness of superiority melting into something foreign to him. Humility. "You speak Arabic?" he asked in English, his voice subdued, almost hesitant. Gone was the booming authority, the mocking tone. Now, his words carried uncertainty, as if he were standing on unfamiliar ground. "Yes," Amina replied with quiet confidence, her voice steady and unwavering. "And just because I'm serving food doesn't mean I lack intelligence, dignity, or dreams. Everyone deserves respect, no matter their job." Her words cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, every guest nearby watching the billionaire's response. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in self-reflection. It was as if someone had finally placed a mirror in front of him, forcing him to confront not just Amina's strength, but the arrogance he had carried unchecked for so long. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he leaned back in his chair and gave a small nod. His shoulders lowered, the weight of his ego slipping away. Then, with a half-smile that carried both defeat and respect, he said, "Then perhaps you should be sitting at this table, not standing beside it." The men around him chuckled nervously, but this time, the laughter wasn't directed at Amina. No one dared to mock her anymore. Instead, the unease in their voices revealed a simple truth. The balance of power had shifted. The billionaire, once untouchable, had just been humbled in public by the very woman he thought was beneath him. Word of the incident spread like wildfire among the staff and guests. At first, it was whispers in the kitchen, murmurs among the tables, and discreet glances toward Amina whenever she passed by. But then, as people began pulling out their phones, reality shifted. Some had already managed to capture short clips of the exchange, and those clips carried the power to travel far beyond the walls of the restaurant. By the next morning, the footage had reached social media platforms. Within hours, it was shared, reposted, and commented on thousands of times. By the end of the week, millions of people had seen the moment a billionaire was humbled by a waitress who refused to let disrespect define her. Headlines dominated the internet. Waitress shuts down billionaire in his own language. The woman who taught a billionaire respect, and respect knows no wealth. Talk shows debated the incident. Newspapers ran stories, and motivational speakers referenced Amina as an example of courage under pressure. People admired not only her intelligence, but also her composure. The way she stood tall, kept her voice calm, and turned a moment of attempted humiliation into one of empowerment. She became a symbol for workers everywhere, a reminder that one's value is never determined by the uniform they wear or the job they hold. Meanwhile, the billionaire found himself in an unfamiliar position. For a man used to controlling the narrative, the internet became a battlefield he couldn't win. He tried to dismiss the event, to move on and bury the memory, but it followed him wherever he went. Business partners, colleagues, and even rivals brought it up with smirks or quiet chuckles. His moment of arrogance had become a permanent lesson in humility, a scar on his reputation that wealth could not erase. As for Amina, her life began to change in ways she had only dreamed of. She gained more than applause and admiration. A wealthy philanthropist, deeply moved by the viral video, reached out to her personally. Impressed by her intelligence, determination, and grace, he offered her a full scholarship to complete her graduate studies. It was the opportunity she had been working toward all along, finally within her grasp. Months later, Amina bid farewell to the restaurant. She left not in shame or defeat, but with her head high and her future wide open. Her story became a reminder to the world. True power does not lie in money or status, but in knowledge, dignity, and respect. And on that unforgettable night, Amina proved that intelligence can silence even the loudest arrogance. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.